Welcome to the August 2021 DevOps for Defense meetup. Today, we're going to talk about what I think is the most important part of making successful teams work well is communication. So, as always, we have our Oh, you're going to do that?
Or did you plan that?
I've got it. It wasn't turned on.
I'm here back up.
I got it. Code of conduct, just a quick reminder, unclassified only, no dirty words. Please treat each other with respect and professionalism. Nothing proprietary, keep your secrets to yourself. Please do talk about your experiences and your needs, share your thoughts and learn from others. Doing a hybrid meetup here is really freaking hard. The network doesn't work again this week. We got great plans to make that better, but we're still working through that. Thank you all for coming out. So, most important part, don't forget. Is that bugging you guys? So don't forget, Agile is 95% communication and 5% ceremony. So a really smart dude told me that one time, and it kind of stuck with me, and it made me realize how Agile was really supposed to work. Because initially I thought it was about, oh, we're going to do these meetings, and the important part's the meeting. We're going to have a backlog, and the important part is writing the backlog. But what it all boils down to is the important part is talking to the people on your team in really clear, unambiguous terms that they can understand. And so when we talk about all these Agile ceremonies, refinement planning, the stand-ups, demonstration, and the retrospectives, it's all about driving healthy communication within the team. And if you don't have healthy communication with these constructs in place, there's totally something wrong, right? You got to think about what's going on. What's the interpersonal dynamic with your team? Because these are specifically constructed and defined to drive that healthy communication with your team. So there's a couple of tips and what you should be doing in there in each of those. But the most important part, just make sure you're talking clearly, make sure that you're communicating frequently, and try to get the ambiguity out. You have to talk to your team in the team's language. Even if that's not your language, you have to translate everything that you do into language your team understands. Now it doesn't work again. So that was kind of the Agile piece of it. What about DevOps? Well, it's at the heart of DevOps. You think about the 3 ways of DevOps. Where does communication fit in? If you're trying to achieve real good flow within your team, you have to be able to openly, honestly, frankly discuss where your obstacles and bottlenecks are and how you're going to attack those as a team. You got to get a shared vision as a team to go forward and make those things happen. Without that communication, you can't achieve the first way of flow. Feedback should have communication baked in, but it's not just communication from other people like stakeholders, it's also communication from your systems. What does your team need to get out of their pipeline? When do they need to get it out? How quickly can they react to it? So think about the kind of systems, the kind of feedback you get, how that is packaged and communicated to your team, and where those sources are coming from. And then with the third way, experimentation and learning, this is all about learning and sharing within your team. So you got to have a culture in your team where it's accepted and it's okay and encouraged to take some risks, to try some things, to have a safe environment, psychologically safe environment that they can all work in, and where that risk, that blast radius of failure is constrained, right? Where the team can always quickly recover from a failure. Talking through those details with your team, making sure that everybody knows what we're doing together is a big part of making that work. And then obviously the learning piece of that is huge. You don't want individuals learning on their own. You want individuals learning within the team and bringing a team along with them as they grow and progress. So I think this is super important. I'm going to tell a little bit of stories here, but You got to write it down. As much as we think verbal communication is important, what's really, really important is written communication. And so, there's great teams have a superpower called a backlog. You can tell how good a team is by doing nothing but opening their backlog and reading a few stories. So I've seen some really amazing backlogs. I've seen some really terrible backlogs, right? And nobody would be shocked. When you have a really good backlog, you have a really high performing team doing really cool stuff. When you have a bad backlog, you have a team who's not performing, who's struggling, who doesn't feel appreciated, right? Who doesn't feel productive, and they don't have that self-gratification that you want to get frequently in the workplace. So getting to a good backlog is really important. It's also a key part of. You have a question?
What would you see in a backlog? Like, what would be?
What's a good versus bad?
Yeah.
A good backlog. So yeah, actually, Patty did a presentation a year or so ago on writing good stories, and that's what you want to see in your backlog is good stories aligned into sprints if you're doing Scrum, or at least prioritized in your backlog. And so whenever what you want to go up is to see what does the team need to do. So a standard story will say, as a stakeholder, who are you doing the work for? Who cares about it? I want something done, preferably something concrete that I can point to. So that, and this is the most important part in my opinion, so that some value proposition. Why am I doing this work, right? And then you want to see acceptance criteria for that. And acceptance criteria should be very brief, true, false statements. Must be done with no yellow colors.
So a bad backlog would have a bunch of stories where none of that is defined. And no.
I'll give you an example of the bad backlog I saw recently. It was the story title was Fix Trouble Ticket 1234. That was the title. And you open it up and there was no story statement. You didn't know who you were doing it for, or who cared about it, or why you were doing it, but it did have acceptance criteria. The acceptance criteria was write the code, write the unit test, run the unit test, compile and deliver to the lab, run in the lab, close the ticket. That was the acceptance criteria. Had no conversation in there about value, gave the team no guidance about success, what actual successful outcomes look like. Just said, you're going to do work. You could cut and paste that on every story and they wouldn't know. They'd say, I did it, right? So that gets into the kind of a point I wanted to make about backlogs. Backlogs are this really neat way. We talk about, the importance of accountability. So backlogs are an interesting way for a team lead or a product owner to hold the team accountable, right? You write a good story, the accountability is baked into that story. When you got that work done, did it meet the acceptance criteria that we defined, right? If it says must not be blue and you show up with a blue widget, you have not met the acceptance criteria, right? You're not done. It's very clear. I can hold you accountable to that. But it works in the reverse manner as well. And I think what most teams don't understand that. If I'm a product owner, and I do this all the time, if I'm a product owner and I think I know what I want, and I'm convinced about it, and I write my story, and I've got acceptance criteria laid out, and the team goes off and they do absolutely everything that I asked them to do in that story. And we talk about it as a team to make sure everybody understands it and all that. But every one of those acceptance criteria is obviously true. They're done, period. By definition, it is done. I'm then held accountable as the product owner if the outcome didn't meet the intent. It means I didn't communicate to the team. I didn't give them the appropriate guidance and acceptance criteria, the right stories to be successful as a team. And I am held accountable for that. The team gets to hold me accountable. So accountability isn't a one-way street. In a command and control culture, it's very much a one-way street. You'll do what I say, you'll bring me a rock, and that's not the right rock. What were you thinking, right? We see that all the time. When we're doing it right, we have really good, healthy cultures, and we communicate well. It's a two-way street. I did exactly what we agreed needed to be done to accomplish this objective for this purpose, and that wasn't correct. That is not the team's fault. That's the product owner's fault. It has this other interesting side effect at the larger scale. You ever work with someone who says, okay, we've got a big event coming up and we really need to be successful. We got to do all of this work. And you as a product owner say, I got this. You create a backlog. It's got all of this work in it. And you know that your team is at capacity, just getting there. You've got X days or weeks to make it happen. You've got to get there. But what happens? Those stakeholders who came in and pushed you hard to meet that date with all of that material or content or capability, probably not 2 days later, show up with an emergency saying, drop everything, get this done. So what should you do? Write it down. Write it down. If it's an emergency, do it. Absolutely. But write it down. I've been through situations with in different contexts in my career where I had these impossible deadlines and we pulled in a bunch of really good people and we were well on the way to get there. But I'll be damned if it wasn't emergency after emergency after emergency once we had our plan defined. And so we're like a week out from this milestone and that stakeholder shows up and says, I need to know that you're ready to go next week. And I have to say, there's no way we can do this. We are not going to get there. We are going to have gaps everywhere. What are you talking about? You're a total failure. We can't live like this. We're not going to be successful. What happened? It was all written down. What happened was you, stakeholder. You came in and disrupted the flow of my team on an almost daily basis, and it was documented. It's a defensive mechanism for your team against those external stakeholders who don't comprehend your own capacity and your own velocity as a team. So use it as a defensive mechanism wherever you can. Document that disruption. It's important that you document that. So there's my life pro tip, very much aligned with that. If it isn't in the backlog, don't do it. That doesn't mean don't do things. That just means write them down. And your email inbox isn't a backlog. Your calendar on Outlook isn't your backlog. When you get, your email inbox isn't your backlog. So it's super important. I have become an expert at one thing in my career, ignoring meeting notices. That's a really hard thing to do sometimes. But sometimes it's the right answer. So just make sure, keep that in mind. Bottom line, write it down. It's not written down, please don't do it. If it needs to be done, please write it down. It shouldn't be hard. But what about meetings? Right meeting? Oh, you want to talk about? I don't have a chart on that, so let's talk about it. What about meetings?
Meetings aren't my backlog either.
No, I agree. Meetings are not your backlog. Your Outlook calendar is not your backlog, 100%. Now, if you need to have a meeting to satisfy an outcome in your backlog, by all means. But when you schedule that meeting, make sure that you have the right people involved who need to be there to achieve that outcome. Make sure everyone knows why they're there and what outcome you're trying to achieve, the purpose, and make sure you have an agenda. Write it down before you send it out. So everyone's on the same page and can be prepared to start that meeting. What about Skype? Oh, Skype's my nemesis. Yeah. Yeah, if you ever need to interrupt my day, just Skype me. I can't ignore it. It's impossible. Like squirrel.
They're like, here, it doesn't answer his email. Duly
Right.
noted. Got it.
Hey, got it.
Bad communication is a real thing, believe it or not.
Like this meeting.
Exactly. We're doing a horrible job tonight. So I kind of like the first one, and it gets to the backlog thing. You wrote such a terrible story that I just made some shit up and threw it out and called it done, right? I've seen stories so bad that no one could claim I failed. You can't say I failed. So it gets to that that precision, and maybe precision's not even the right word, just the trying to you have to drive out the ambiguity. The absence of ambiguity in your story is really what you're going for, and in your written communication. The other one, we talked about email. Microsoft Office, I would argue, is what did I call it here? The unproductivity suite. Oh my God. You can't configuration manage it. You ship it off, right? And somebody ships it back to you via email with an underscore V1, and somebody else did the same damn thing, and now you got to figure out what to do with it. What a terrible way to work collaboratively as a human being.
I had a German engineer tell me one time, if you can't make a point, make a PowerPoint.
All right, I'll repeat that for the, if you can't make a point, make a PowerPoint. I love it. So avoid PowerPoint poisoning. That's a warning to all. I love Dilbert. Oh my God. So the other key piece, I think, of communication is really take learning seriously. You have to outlearn the competition, especially in our business. The competition is for real. They're not going to beat you in the marketplace. They're going to beat you in the battle space. And you got to be serious about learning. You got to stay inside of their thought process, inside of their decision cycle, and you got to outpace them in every way. And learning is how you get there. So I want to encourage everybody, add learning activities to your backlog explicitly. I think it helps everyone, and learning is something you should do as a team, not as an individual. So a few things you can do. I've brought in subject matter experts on different topics to talk to the team about work they're doing, and they really seem to enjoy it. I've gotten really great response and feedback out of that. I love having movie hours. I'll literally pop popcorn and pull up a conference presentation on YouTube with the team, and we'll go through something and talk about the key points and how it applies to the work we're doing. And we always enjoy that. I think it's a lot of fun. Lean coffees we do here at the meetup. I think that's a great way to get some engagement with the team. And then spikes, I enjoy doing this. This is where someone can go off, write a story in your backlog that's a spike. And the only outcome, the output of that story is more stories. That's all you do. Go off and learn about something and then write some stories for the team to consider a path forward or perform an experiment or do something like that. Those are really cool ways that you can keep people engaged and progressing forward with new learning, new experimentation. And then I think,
I like that one.
which,
Yeah, that's a good one.
you like it?
Yeah, I like that.
Good. It's
I'm saying
published on
building
GitHub if you need a copy.
In your in-house, building that competency is super important.
Totally.
You don't- that's what you need. A lot
Yeah.
of these-
More than tools.
I agree. in general.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's kind of that if you can't invest in yourself and your team, what are you investing in and why? The most important things we have are our teams. So take it seriously. It's part of your job. And then I think, one of the things that makes, especially organizations successful is this concept, this idea of transformational leadership. And communication is absolutely foundational to that. I was telling a story earlier, a couple weeks ago, right before I left on vacation, what was I? I was 74 hours into my week, and I'm having a refinement session with my team right before I leave for a week, and I am grumpy, and it's the first time they've ever done a refinement, and they're scared, and we plowed through it. That was bad communication. That is not what you should do, right? You should find ways to drive clarity, make connections, create creativity within your team, get them engaged, have confidence in what you're doing and where you're going as a team. Yeah.
We're not gonna be able to hear you.
Oh, that's right. The music's going. So we're going to wrap it up. I did like the little sidebar comment. The greatest gifts you give your team is clarity, communication, and pulling people together around a shared mission, right? Getting aligned, going forward, and being successful. Rely on your team, and more importantly, especially if you're leading a team, the team leads. you support. You're there to make them successful, not the other way around. So that's it. We'll move on to the link copy. If you guys want to do a link copy, that would be awesome. Or we can just socialize. It's great to see people out. So we'll wrap it up for this time. I hope you thought it was a good talk and a good topic.
I'm pulling for